Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to AuthorStory. I am your host, Alexander Lim, and on this episode, I'll be speaking with Mariam Baker, author of the book Sacred Voices Stories from the Caravan of Women, which you can check out right now by clicking on the Amazon link in the video description below. As for the authors themselves, well, Mariam is the executive director of the Soulwork Foundation and has been initiated in Ayadi Christian lineage of Sufism. Cynthia Dollard is the illustrator and designer of the book, and she has also been an active member of Sufi Ruhaniyat International since the early 1990s, and she also teaches at college level. So, Mariam, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander. Good morning
Good morning.
from California.
Yeah,
Yes.
cool. And it's great to have you with us here. So, Mariam, so first off, what was your inspiration for writing Sacred Voices?
The fundamental inspiration is a yearning for peace. And in this yearning, I really observe how often, as people, we're more similar than different, and we really don't know it. So I wanted to uncover, in this particular volume, focusing on the sacred voices of women, the stories, the untold stories of Muslim and Sufi women that come from what we might call the tree of Abraham, the Judaic, Christian, and Islam traditions. So, in this first volume of Sacred Voices, very much wanting to uncover those unheard and oral tradition stories.
Okay, so was there like a single aha moment when you said, I should write this book?
Well, it began a long time before this book of Sacred Voices. It began with the first book I wrote called Woman as Divine, Tales of the Goddess, which looks at a more universal picture or face of the sacred feminine. So it really began in my late teens when I realized that women mystics, women saints were much more hidden. Our voices, from whatever religion it might be, were not as accessible. And at this moment in our human journey, our human history, we really need all our voices of wisdom.
Right, right. Okay, so this is like something that built up over decades then. I mean, if you were interested this long.
Yes, most definitely, and still is a very important theme for me. As I look to families, young women, actually anyone, all of us of the human family, this is major as we move towards a healthier, I pray, environment and ability to relate to one another and to ourselves.
Right. So I'd like to get into a couple of elements here. First off, Sufism. I mean, a lot of folks aren't familiar with Sufism. So what is it?
Really good question, Alexander. If we Googled it, what would come up is that it is the mystical branch of Islam. Now, that's one answer. The tradition that both Cynthia, my co creator, and myself are part of goes back to a tradition way before the Prophet Muhammad, perhaps even to what we might call the first man and woman, the first human beings as they stood up on this planet Earth. So we come from a tradition that is very universal and celebrates and honors the sacred in all traditions and in all manifestations.
But Sufism, I take it, is associated more with Islam than with any other religion. This is correct?
It is known that way at this point.
Okay.
And yes, absolutely. And then, as I say, the tradition that we come from, someone could be a Christian Sufi, as well as a Muslim Sufi, a Jewish Sufi, a Hindu Sufi. This honoring of all life as sacred is part of the universality of the Sufi tradition we come from.
Mm. And are there any other elements central to the Sufi tradition in other than that, as you already mentioned, that all life is sacred?
Yes, most definitely. uh, vector that moves us as a human race towards unity. And this can be seen in all the traditions, really. I was so surprised when I was in Egypt in the tombs and could see this story that we find in all the sacred scriptures, that we are one tribe, a human tribe moving into larger and larger wisdom and unity. And I see this as I travel around the world in all traditions. So an underlying theme of movement into we are one family, we honor a great mystery beyond our comprehension that could be called the one and only being, or it could be called love, also a unifying force.
All right. Okay. Now you mentioned that people from different religions can follow the Sufi philosophy, Sufism. Is there what's the commonality between, say, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, for example, you're aware of that makes this
Oh,
applicable
yes.
to them?
Yeah, well, the first commonality is what's called the Tree of Abraham.
Hmm.
So that underlying belief in each of these traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that the book begins with the prophets that are recognized in these three traditions. So we look to Abraham, we look to Moses. Of course, within Arabic, these names are pronounced differently
Hmm.
as they might be in the original language of Jesus, Aramaic. So certainly looking to the male prophets is recognized in all these three religions. Uh, the prophet Jesus, Isa is revered, as well as Prophet Muhammad, as well as Abraham and Moses. Again, we see the stories of the women from these traditions much more hidden. And we live in a time right now where women's voices and all our voices are becoming more and more revealed. And certainly the intentionality of the book, Sacred Voices, is on peace. How do we make peace as a human race? How do we make peace between the genders as men and women? Let alone the greater diversity of sexuality and gender that exists.
Hmm. Right. Okay. So about women, I mean, it's definitely something. I mean that the voice of women, as you mentioned, it's not as well known as the voice of the male philosophers, prophets, and the like. What is since Sufism is associated with Islam nowadays? What is do you think is the status be of women in Islam or even in the world?
Another good question, Alexander. It's very much at a point of transition.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, that is my optimistic look at what is going on. And while we see not only in Islam, certainly all the religions, perhaps women in a more um, what could even be called enslaved position or locked position in terms of opportunity. This is really changing around the world and certainly will only bring peace as we do honor and include the wisdom of women in our journey towards peace.
Mm. Okay, all right. And how will, let just to give our listeners a solid picture, how will increasing, I mean, how will, as you mentioned, unlocking the present status of women result in peace?
First of all, it opens us to a larger creative foundational wisdom that includes both the right and left brain of our ability to problem solve.
Hmm.
Um, Women also, we cannot ignore our bodies, whether it is from childbirth, whether it is that we are the carriers of the seeds, of the eggs of the future. We can't ignore our bodies. And how as women do we bring this wisdom into our acts of child rearing, of relationship, of also research within the academic world. And I'd say that everything that women do, or not to make a global faux pas here, I'd say that it is for all life, a certain awareness that we are interconnected.
Okay, all right. So in the interconnectedness, and I suppose this is what you try to bring out in this book, the interconnectedness and the relationships.
Most definitely. And also to explore, especially in those parts of the Northern Hemisphere, perhaps, where Islam is really an unknown. And when we don't know something, it's easier to project negativity upon it. And so very much an intention to reveal a way that, again, we are really moving towards peace together. And the more that we can understand each other, the more that this will seed peace and good health for our planet and for all humanity.
Right, and definitely, I mean, the political climate in countries like the United States, it's kind of biased against Islam now. I mean, get the elephant out of the room here. I mean, there's a lot of
Yes,
hate involved.
absolutely. And as I travel, I perceive this very much in the Northern Hemisphere, more than anywhere else. Although it's in the Southern Hemisphere as well. And it's not only Islam, of course, it's a bias against women, it's a racial bias.
Mm,
And it's time we're ready as a human race to cross a threshold into a greater accommodation of one another, and perhaps an opportunity for peace and to save our beautiful, beautiful planet from destruction and annihilation.
right, okay. So now about the book. I mean, it's well, on the shallowest level, what really caught my attention is that, its layout, its pages, it reminded me very much of an old-time illustrated manuscript. And certainly it's very different from the usual, typeface and paper layout of most books. Was this a deliberate choice?
Yes, it most definitely was, Alexander. We wanted to reflect to our audience of readers the beauty of the story, of women's story, of oral tradition story, perhaps a story that cannot be found in an academic text, and
Mm,
yet a story that a mother might tell her son or daughter. We wanted to also weave in poetry and recipes from women around the world to share the experience of what our life is
mm.
as women.
And I found it interesting, that you mentioned including recipes, because I mean that's not the usual kind of thing you'd include in a poem book or in a story, an anthology of stories.
Yeah, and one of our underlying philosophies is let's eat, dance, and pray together. So,
Mhm,
recipes, eating together, celebrating, and also whether we call it prayer or song, that
mhm,
we celebrate what is sacred, what is mystery in our lives is part of this book.
mhm. Okay, okay. So how did you get your hands on all these stories? The stories, the poems, the recipes, the images. How did you get your hands on all these?
Yeah, I am leading a most blessed life in that I get to travel around the world. So uh, that's where these stories and recipes come from. As I travel, as I teach, as I learn from other people,
Mm,
I have been able to interview, access wisdom stories that I would not have been able to
mm.
without being in the desert of Tunisia or other places in our in our world.
Mm. And was it easy for, the people you spoke with, particularly the women, was it easy for them to open up to you guys and speak with you about all these stories?
Uh, Yes, and then for some of the women, they specifically asked that they remain anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't honored that. Some of it is the current situation of bias against Islam in different places of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of it, unfortunately, is also bias within Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Between even Shia and Sunni
Mm-hmm.
orientations towards Islam.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a request from certain women to remain anonymous.
Mm. Okay, okay. So, what were some of your favorite stories or poems that you came across?
Ha. Um, well, one of the interviews I'd say that's my favorite is from a young woman I've known since she was a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
And to hear her journey as a teenager into her marriage, into her having children,
Mm-hmm.
this was very delightful to hear her story. Certainly, very moving to me is the story of who we call Hagar in English,
Mm-hmm.
Hajar. Uh, Her story when she is taken out into the desert by Ibrahim,
Mm-hmm.
and her journey as she searches for water. I find this a very poignant story. So I put this as a highlight for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Mm. All right. And was there any one person whom you spoke with whose background or whose story really hit you? I mean, it had like a really major impact on you.
Yes, there's a woman, and this was interesting coming from the United States. We know very little, many of us, of our ancestry,
Mm-hmm.
who could speak back hundreds and hundreds of years of having traveled from Persia into India
Mm-hmm.
and then to Africa as a refugee, and then from there into the States.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Actually, two women, one from who is a refugee from Afghanistan, the long
Mm-hmm.
journey, uh, and another woman very much impressed me with the constancy of courage and belief and optimism as they moved from one place of safety to another
Mm-hmm.
when they became refugees. This story was very and is very profound to me. How do we maintain this courage? I think of young Malala from Pakistan
Mm-hmm.
and her great courage. This is a very profound and important seed to thread for to plant for all of us. We all need more courage at this moment in our world politics.
Right, right. Well, definitely. I mean, given the state of the world right now, I mean, all this stuff happening, there's definitely room for courage.
Yes, and more voices of wisdom and more voices for peace. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, what would you say? Would you say that this book has a single theme, or is this really just a collection of stories, poems, and recipes?
The underlying theme, as I mentioned, is peace. And within that theme, the belief that as each of our voices is honored, is respected,
Mm.
is claimed as worthy, that this brings us more and more towards peace within ourselves and in our communities and in all relationship. So the freeing of the voice, the freeing of each of us into the fullness of who we are as human beings. So many of us are hypnotized, whether it's by our education or religion, uh, our ancestors. How do we cross a threshold into really embracing the fullness of our humanity and what that means at this moment in time?
Right, right, okay. So, I know that you teach and lead workshops around the world. What is it? Where does this book fit in with the work that you do, and what is it you eventually hope to achieve?
Ah, certainly seeding personal and planetary peace. So there's a constancy of this focus on peace that begins. The Sufi poet Rumi speaks to this very well. All the world is a guest house, invite them all. This seeding of peace that we can, instead of approaching our human family uh, as something to step back from, how do we make peace with ourselves and on a larger planetary level? So as I travel, this is a very strong thematic, as well as how do we give vitality in a time when we are so bombarded by the media and by our daily lives with things that can cause so much stress. How do we add greater vitality to our lives and quicken our ability to let go, to purify ourselves from what might be bombarding and distracting us from the essential nature of love, harmony, and beauty? So that's a little bit of what I do as I travel, very much focusing on tools that serve us for what I might call quickening our ability to be present and available to ourselves and to life.
Right, right. Okay, well, that's a big goal right there. It's a very big objective. Okay, so Mariam, let's say, if there was only one thing you would say or could say that our listeners, or maybe even those who would read the book, if there's one thing that you could say that they could take away from this, one message that you hope would be conveyed, what would that one thing or that one message be?
I would say passion for love, harmony, beauty, and peace.
Hmm, okay. Would you like to elaborate?
Uh, the more passion that we have, again, I'll quote the prophet Rumi here, who says, listen, listen, listen.
Hmm,
Ask for what you really want. The more that we're able to do that, to uncover what is the longing of our soul,
hmm,
of our journey, this life journey, the more that we can add passion to that and freedom and the courage to to infuse that with this passion, I believe that this will seed for all of us this love, harmony, and beauty and peace.
wow. Okay. All right. Got that. Well, that's a definitely a profound message right there. Cool. Okay, so then in closing, Mariam, you know, I wish we could talk more, but gotta wrap up now. So in closing, the book is Sacred Voices, Stories from the Caravan of Women. The authors are Mariam Baker and Cynthia Dollard, and you can find their book on Amazon. So Mariam, gosh, this is this is a very deep topic, and thank you very much for introducing it to us, and thank you very much for being an author story.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Really delightful to connect with you this morning.
Cool. So everyone, go on right ahead and check out Sacred Voices as well as subscribe to our channel. So catch you all next time with the next Author Story Weekly interview.